AI to Go podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the AI to Go podcast. I'm your co-host, Lucia.
My name is Johannes. I'm your co-host.
And today with us, there is Andreas Zimmermann from MySupply. We're going to talk about AI in procurement and a lot of other things AI related. So I would say without further ado, let's get to it. Andreas, welcome to the AI to Go podcast. Tell us a little bit more about you. Who are you?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. So, as you said, I'm Andreas. I'm based in Hamburg. I founded MySupply a couple of years ago. Before I was starting a consulting company and running it for a couple of years. And I'm father of two, married, and as I said, living in Hamburg.
Very nice. Today, I feel surrounded by Germans, as our Johannes is also German. As an Italian, I'm not sure, I feel like, okay, I have to be very precise today. So let's see. But
you really think so? So I think that's still a myth.
Okay. Well, that is true. Actually, knowing Johannes for a while, I think he's more Italian than me, except for the punctuality. This I know he likes.
But we all love good Italian food, so I think that's a common denominator here.
Perfect. And we all like German beer also, so that's good. I think we're fine. But, of course, Andreas, you are the co-founder now, the founder and CEO of MySupply. However, you did have other companies in the past, so you seem to be a bit of a serial entrepreneur. So tell us a little bit more about your entrepreneurial journey, like really what inspires you to be in this, very exciting, but sometimes challenging journey, which is entrepreneurship.
Okay, so where to start? So basically, I studied business information management at University of Paderborn. And during this period of time, I was getting to know a junior enterprise, basically. There's a lot all over Europe, and this one in particular, it was the one in Paderborn, and it was quite interesting. Because as a student, you can already do really cool projects in businesses, doing process management topics and all over that case. So there was really a very cool time, and I learned so much. And you're becoming kind of an entrepreneur from that because you smell it and then you just need to do it. And what I did during this period of time was a bit different than many other junior enterprises all over Europe, which are not just only doing consulting, but in Germany it's most likely on consulting. And this is what I learned basically. And so after my studies, of course, as you can imagine, so I learned nothing else but consulting. So I was staying in the consulting, joined a smaller company, joined a medium-sized company, and joined a bigger consulting company. And for a while, I learned a lot. It was really great, doing a lot of exciting projects. But then I figured out, come on, let me do something on my own. I just need to start something. And basically, of course, I had no clue what to do but consulting. So I just started in a consulting as well, of course, founding my own company. And it grew over the time also with some very, very big customers. I myself was very much into change management at that time, doing also projects in procurement. And also doing a lot of projects in the area of let's say corporate culture, which was very interesting, which I liked a lot. And but right now it feels for me a bit like, all right, there's something else I need to do. So that's not just the end of the game. So that should not be basically written on my graveyard. So that's not what I'm looking for. And I need to do something else. And I was looking for, let's see what cool products I can look into. And I was first of all coming from the side of let's say being a managing director of a consulting company, did a lot of negotiations. And so what happened on a regular basis is, okay, it was always the same. So they were asking 3 consulting companies for a quote. Then the customer was selecting one of them. Then procurement calls and negotiates 3% off. So that was the process. And I asked myself, I saw it a couple of times, and I asked myself, come on, that's not the goal here. Come on, you can do better. And I started basically with an idea, building an MVP for this, and this was called Expertist. And a first startup in that area. And starting, let's say, basically negotiating, especially consulting contract in the first place. And then basically what happened is I went to fairs and asking people, hey, come on, how do you like this? Said, yeah, that's nice, but we don't buy so much consulting. Can we not just get it for all the other stuff as well? Yeah, come on, but there is so much software out there, so much procurement software. Yeah, but nothing what is easy. And this was basically, after I heard this a couple of times, this was basically the birth of MySupply. And then I started, let's say, coming from something very special into a more generic thing. And yeah, so this is how the journey began, basically.
Sounds great. And I think you have a very like multidisciplinary background with business informatics and then like your journey in consulting. You think like this has led you to ultimately ending up in entrepreneurship and founding MySupply? Like what are the contributing factors from your perspective here, looking back on your career?
So I think, let's say, honestly speaking, I think the time during my in the junior enterprise, what the time when you really feel, all right, it's so cool that you can do something, that you can build something on your own. And of course, I think it's a combination of having some cool experience and maybe also a bit of DNA, which gets you there. So that it basically happened. But of course, it was not that I was just, all right, had the idea at the very first moment and just need to execute it. So it just happens sometimes. Of course, ideas just happen and also circumstances just happen. And I would never thought that I will kind of go to procurement, but basically it happened. And this is what many people of procurement basically said. Nobody plans to go into procurement. It just happened. But I think it was kind of a combination, especially a very, very interesting time during my studies that also made me more look into, just try to build something on my own.
And, I can understand that many people in procurement, they kind of end up in procurement because from a, let's say, supplier perspective, procurement is a nightmare and it seems a little bit boring, right? Can you convince me otherwise?
Of course, procurement is a very exciting space. Of course, just the way how it is currently done is very boring. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there are so many cool things you can do about procurement, especially in an area which is not so cool. Yeah, and there's even much more room for doing it really cool. And we try to do nothing else but that. So there is, especially in the area where, let's say, you think nothing changed for over 20 years, there's the biggest opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What was the moment when you realized that there's an opportunity to couple to rethink procurement systems and processes with the power of new technology like AI?
I think there wasn't one moment. So there were many moments, so to speak, where you learn about, all right, you can do something better than what exists today. But so one of the moments was about, all right, so game theory is something that is not pretty new. And we have not even been talking about AI, let's say in 2020 at that time about this. So that wasn't at least the core of the idea. But just thinking about, okay, there is a lot of books about game theory, very high level experts, consulting companies dealing with that topic. And there is, on the other hand, the reality of having procurement tools not integrating these ideas at all. And so why can we not just build algorithmic game theory, basically, to make that happen? And not even talking about AI. This was just a very common thing. So why? It's not so complicated. There is a certain criteria, there is books you can read, and then you just put it into an algorithm and make, let's say, that particular ideas of game theory being represented in an algorithm, then everybody can execute it and not just the expert that read 3 books about game theory. So this was one of the moments that, okay, just let's do it. So I think I have a rough idea how this is going. So let's just do it and build it into MySupply. And this is what we did. And this was one of the first moments where we said, all right, we can do so much better than what happens today.
Can you explain what algorithmic game theory is? And also maybe we start with game theory.
Yeah. So I was about to say the only thing I remember about game theory is the prisoner's dilemma, which I studied at the university, like probably ages ago, so enlighten us.
Yeah. So of course, game theory is, especially just what was said, is just one example of that's what game theory is. You right now learn a lot about, let's say, looking into what happens in the Oval Office and what happens in the negotiation about Ukraine. You can also learn a lot about game theory here, that's for sure. But in the particular area I'm looking into, it's more about negotiation. So how can a good negotiation look like? And this is also part of the game theory where we see, all right, so I'm in a current buyer perspective, and then there is a couple of suppliers. How do I behave in the best manner to get the best results for me? And just give you one stupid example. So for example, if the prices are very close to each other, for example, one supplier quoted, I don't know, 50,000, one quoted 53,000, and one quoted 54,000. So it's very clear that an algorithm, so a negotiation method, can work very well, which is working on a clip club level. So this means, so one is bidding more, the other one is bidding more, and they're getting, let's say, themselves to improved pricing. So, but this is one of the things is the prices needs to be on a certain same level. If that's not the case, that's not working, because then there's no movement. Though there's one supplier having a better bid, but if you do the same algorithm, the supplier is not moving anymore, because that's already it. And so you can't get this supply moving. So you need to get a different negotiation method than what I just explained as a clip club. For example, you do things like a Dutch negotiation, a Dutch auction, which is working completely different. So that's just the core ideas, just giving you one example of game theory, where this is all coming from. And there's a lot of more things you need to consider, that's for sure, but this is just an easy example. And if you have this logic and put this into an algorithm, it's nothing else but that. So the system knows very well. So it can learn from, for example, like, all right, is the offers that I have, are they on the same level or not? And this is one criterion, for example, for the negotiation method. To give you one very concrete example, for example.
So game theory, in other words, would be like, how do I influence behavior of vendors in multi-vendor scenarios? And then the algorithm part then would be, how do I embed that mechanism in a code, right? In an algorithm, so to say. So how do I make sure that the system learns and understands the different mechanisms? Like you mentioned, the Dutch auctions, there are other auction mechanisms, right? Understands it, learns it, and applies it whenever it is needed. Is that deterministic in a way? So do you have rules attached to it, or is that already like learning along the auction or along the negotiation?
Of course, so it's basically both. So let's say the core, as we started, was very much driven by an algorithm that was developed with experienced consultants, getting all this knowledge into an algorithm that can just execute it. But of course, now we get data, we learn from there, we see what works very well and can improve the algorithm. Not only the algorithm, but also the underlying procedures. So for example, things like, what do we believe about this particular category? Yeah, was this a good thought that we had, or do we need to let's say change this? What is our assumptions? Is the assumptions about the margin in that particular category, is this reasonable or not? So there is, of course, on the one hand, the situation that we can learn of course from what happened, and validate also the algorithms that we set up in place in the first place. So that's the combination of basically both.
In your journey, when you approach like the first like procurement organizations, what are kind of like the learnings that you old experts like who have been there in the space for a while, and then you with the new startup and a new idea, new technology come to them, and you do their pitch. Like, how do you what were the responses that you were confronted with in the beginning, and how did you tackle that?
Yeah. So let's say exactly what Lucia just said in the very first place. This is also, of course, what happened to us. So it's a very boring, traditional, let's say, area you're sometimes coming in. And if you're coming up with, okay, hi, I have a really cool idea how to, let's say, not only help you, but also automate things. The first thing what comes into the game is fear. And of course, people feel offended, feel afraid, because they think, of course, I did so for the last 20 years. Now this guy is coming around the corner and is giving me a tool, and this can do my job better than me. If this is true or not, yeah. But that's basically their start immediately pushing this away and say, all right, ooh. And so it's very important whom you talk to, of course. So, and that's what one of the first learnings. There is people very innovative, very open for, let's say, doing a real digitalization. And there is others, that you better should not talk to, because they're just afraid and feel offended, even though it makes no sense. Yeah. And it will not take their jobs, but it will help them do much better, become more effective and more efficient. And so basically, from my perspective, the fear in Germany is very strong. And of course, also the resistance to doing something really new. And we learned a lot about that. If you want to digitalize the process and get it to the next level, it's really important to have the right people behind.
Yeah, that's makes sense, right? At the end of the day, whenever there is a new innovation, you're always going to find the early adopters that are super excited about it and really see the value. And then obviously, as time passes, also the more traditional, let's say, are going to get convinced. But diving a little bit deeper on MySupply, right? So obviously we know, and we kind of hinted at the fact that you are revolutionizing the procurement world. So let's say I'm one of these traditional people working in procurement, right? And of course, I have my own way of working. So can you convince me, right, that my old way of working, my old procurement system doesn't really work? And basically, how does MySupply help me specifically get better at my job? So what does MySupply do for me?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that MySupply can help with. So basically, so just to summarize this just a bit. So we're starting basically in the moment where there is, where someone has a demand. So a requester has something in mind he wants to buy. So this is basically where the process with MySupply starts, and it ends in the moment where you have a supplier and a price. So everything in between is handled by MySupply. So, or could be handled by MySupply. And so if I'm talking to someone from procurement, one of the most common problems that procurement has is, for example, the situation that the demand description they're getting from the requester is very bad. So this means I'm writing, I need a table. All right, cool, you need a table. So, and what happens then in the next step is, so procurement calls the guy, all right, that's nice, you need a table. So what kind of table? What size? What color? Is there a particular brand, and whatever. So all of these kind of things, MySupply already takes care for. So this is in the first step, and there we already help procurement. And no matter what happens after, that's already a win for procurement, because the so-called intake or the understanding of the specification is a very crucial part in the very beginning. And of course, if you want to automate something and you don't have a good demand description, you can forget about the rest, basically. And this is the reason why we start there and where we help procurement. And this is the point where most of procurement people say, okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Already with this argument, you managed to win them over. So that's good.
Not fully, yeah, but basically, let's say that already helps a lot, let's say, starting the conversation. And of course, then, need to go deeper about understanding exactly how they work. Is there an operative tactical procurement center, for example? Is the requester supposed to buy things on their own already? Do they have maverick buying in the company, and whatever? So what is their current maturity? There's the different ways how you can handle things, but this is normally where the process starts and where it's already very helpful to get it started and take it from there where the problem happens, because from there you can take it all and do the whole automation of the full process.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, because that's a bit right. I think the most interesting, right, is really okay. To what level actually can we automate, save time, and so on? Once again, from the vendor perspective, my only experience with procurement so far that was really complicated was with the SAP. It's so complicated. Like seriously, like if you had to like submit like your proposal and everything, is so even with the manuals, it is really difficult, right? So does MySupply also help make it a little bit easier also from the vendor perspective, right? So is it a bit more user friendly for all of us to want to do business with these big companies, but are a little bit scared of this, super lengthy and complex process?
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, it's the same here, especially when you're in tactical buying. So it's not like you have multi-million-dollar deals. So if you have also simple things you're buying that the value is, I don't know, 1,000 euro, 5,000 euro. And this is also, let's say, also the sweet spot of MySupply, taking care for the smaller spend. Then you need to win the supplier as well. And if the supplier doesn't like you at all, so he's not playing with you basically. But if you help him getting deals very easily and without a lot of effort, that's just very good. So to explain a bit more in depth what this means. So tactical buying or tail spend buying is a smaller spend in a company. It's not high strategic, it's tactical or it's tail spend. So the thresholds are different from company to company. But this is basically also the most likely overseen area in the spend area, because strategic, as everybody was looking at strategic spend for many, many years, and they squeezed it out like crazy also during the last years. But the smaller spend, the tactical or the tail spend, there's still a lot of potential in there. And that's also the reason why we, let's say, focused on this one. But again, getting to the question about the suppliers, that's a crucial thing. So for now, we are supporting the supplier by a very simplified UI to do that. But also in the future, as we right now do with our requesters, it will be an agentic model, basically. Also, this will move to an agentic conversation, and I assume we'll talk about this a bit later, a bit more in depth.
Let's dive into that in a minute, just to understand your description a bit better. So on the one hand side, you have the short tail strategic spend, like high volume, like a lot of the total budget of a company is dedicated there in terms of probably like 80% of the volume, and it's like 20% of the suppliers, right? In the classical ideal scenario. And then you have the long tail spend. So the lower volume, like the chairs, office supplies, the pens that you procure, where like a lot of manual resources are still deployed, and where usually it's kind of difficult to keep track of all the different items in those 80% of the suppliers that may be at 20% to the overall spend, right? Can you explain a bit like the dynamics, especially for the long tail, and how you can help automate that?
Yes, sure. So let's say there's basically two bit different ways how to do that. On the one hand, you can, let's say, enable or let's say help the requester to buy things on his own. So this means we build a system that helps the requesters not only define the demand, but also a system that guides him completely through the process, meaning we automatically detect what is the right category here, what is good suppliers for that particular purchase, and then starting the tendering process, getting offers in, helping the requester to evaluate these offers, basically also by the use of AI, and finally also doing the negotiation, as I just mentioned, with using game theory to determine, is there a bot negotiation reasonable? Is there an auction reasonable? Right now, of course, also a lot is moving into AI bot negotiation that have a really, really huge power as well. So all this process is the way how you can handle it if you really want to highly automate things. So this means the requester can buy things on his own, but still being very compliant, being able to, let's say, comply with the rules within the company. For example, I need 3 offers until this, let's say, spend level or after this spend level. and to help basically getting these things done and acting as a digital buyer, so to speak. But there is also the possibility, if you want to handle it differently, saying, all right, I just define the demand in the very first place, push it to the MySupply dashboard on the buyer's side, and the buyer can take over and do the things as he needs. So he can also use MySupply, but he can use also another solution. So there's a high variety of how you can integrate it into environments. But I think what is very much a key also, and what AI changes a lot, that right now agents can help a lot, especially on the requester side, to get everything completely into a next level. And that's right now really changing, especially during the last year, and especially the last half year, where this is really taking off.
You were mentioning in one of our previous conversations, and also on the website, it's quite visible that you have the big vision of a fully autonomous sourcing process. Mm-hmm. Can you describe, like, when we're at a party and we have like a casual talk, can you describe in simple terms, if I'm an outsider of procurement and the tech world, what that means and how you want to do that?
Yeah, so basically it's a bit what I just try to explain with this agentic model. So the requester has just someone to talk to, and that's the MySupply agent. And the MySupply agent takes everything in that particular tail spend area, what can be done by some support from procurement, meaning asking the right questions in the first place about what is a good description for my demand. So understanding things like, as I just said, with a table, giving you one example. But also, let's say, if you have a first offer, you can upload the offer and the LLM extracts the information from the first offer that you already have them. So you get all the data steady in the very first place. And then basically it does everything that in the end you can just chat to this agent all over the place until you have everything what you need, and you still see, all right, is this already in delivery, when this is coming, and you just have this one agent to talk to. And that's basically representing the digital buyer that we provide with MySupply. That's basically changing the way how you interact with procurement. But this doesn't mean procurement is out of the game. Procurement pretty much sets the rules for everything. So their category managers needs to say, all right, for my category, I want to have 3 offers until this, let's say, until this threshold. I want to have these suppliers as preferred suppliers that always needs to be asked, and you can only choose from these suppliers, for example. Or this is a way how you also can get to know new suppliers. And they set the rules. Procurement set the rules that basically the digital buyer works on their behalf and helps basically getting things done for a spend level where procurement is normally not interested at all. So what happened in this area is, in most of the cases, because there is just no capacity in the companies, they just get one offer, procurement checks, is everything compliant, and orders. Mm-hmm. So that's the reality. And what we do right now is taking over, getting more offers in, negotiating, and getting, in the end, even not without having high involvement of procurement, getting much better results by much more competition, by really getting it into a sourcing process, not just an ordering, and doing also very good negotiation. That helps on the efficiency side, and also pretty much on also on the negotiation side. So it helps to reduce the costs, and of course also the efficiency a lot.
Maybe let's take one example to make it more tangible. Like, say Lucia is planning to purchase office supplies. She needs new pens, she needs new blocks to write on, and what else do you need? Maybe a chair and a desk for a new employee, right? And you are the one, Andreas, imitating now the agent. So how would the interaction look like from the requester side, so the buyer, to the agent, and what would the agent do like once this is clear?
Mm-hmm. So what you just described was very much catalog material, where you would normally buy in catalogs. So what our tool what MySupply would do is, of course, try to understand what Lucia needs, what is the demand, and then suggest, all right, you can get it from a catalog, you can buy it here, click on the button, then you buy it. So that's a very easy take, because this is just a very little complicated spend. Yeah, it's catalog based. So if catalogs are connected, that's a very easy journey. But it can also help when it's getting more complicated. Yeah, when there is other stuff that is where you're just not getting just a table from a catalog. So there is, of course, demand that are more complicated to deal with, where you need to evaluate pros and cons, having a bonus and a malus for certain suppliers, saying, all right, this one is better because of this, and this one is better because of this, or less good. And then also taking all this into consideration and during the full process, including negotiation. So it will assist all the time for whatever it needs, basically to helping Lucia what she really needs and getting it in a short period of time without needing to wait for procurement for 3 weeks, or maybe trying to understand, is the form filled out correctly or something like this. So the bot just asks the question that is really needed and really makes sense.
And potentially, because I know some friends, like they work at larger companies, and, let's say every 6 months they have a new team joining, let's say a new interns team and so on. So every 6 months they have to buy always the same things. They need to buy, I don't know, new t-shirts, new mugs, new laptops, right? Could I potentially automate this process as well? Or like, I don't know, every 6 months we have to be there, and, and then the interns arrive and they don't have the laptop, which happens all the time, right? So could you help me with that as well?
Yes, of course. So the question is how you want to structure it. Do you want to make a contract with a certain supplier and just order it? So that's normally also one of the easiest thing that you can do. But you can also say, all right, I have a variety of different things that I need, and I want to order it with different suppliers. And the system can also help you to managing this process, understanding, is this something you can only buy, or where everything needs to be bought from one supplier, or can we split up the things and order it at different places? So this could be a process you start in our agent, for example, and then the tool handles everything basically on your behalf as you need it, and also can suggest, is it really what you need, or is this something else? If you can even ask, I need to buy, let's say, a starting equipment for so-and-so, and then the tool can help you define what it is.
That is very nice as well. In case you have doubts, do I really need to buy this chair this time? Think about this twice, which I can imagine it could be quite helpful also in like, let's say, in more like rough times per company, right? Like, think twice.
It shouldn't be like with a butcher. Can it be a bit more? So that's not the idea, of course. But let's say giving you the idea, okay, is this the stuff that you need, and so that you're pretty much able to that your new colleague is able to start working.
Perfect.
I love it. And just to close on the overall workflow, right? So you have the demand, you understand the demand, the requirements, then you reach out to the vendors to like get the first quotes. And then I think this is outstanding. You even get to negotiate and ultimately do the purchase, right? Can you explain a bit on the negotiation closing side, and also how the human is like a part of that process? Because I think that's also like about trust and verification. So maybe we spend some time exploring like the closing side of the process.
Yeah, sure. So on the one hand, of course, it's not a black box, so it can be pretty much set up by procurement as procurement wants to have the process. So we do it basically in 3 steps. So the first step is basically we start by building lots. So this means you might have a tender situation where you have different items in, and not everybody was quoting on everything. So sometimes, these 2 items is, let's say, offered by this supplier and this supplier, and there is a big mixture. Of course, it could be very complex. So what we do in the first step is we try to build lots. So we put together the items that can be together negotiated together well. So it's a combination of cherry picking and bundling effect, what we do. And then when we have this, we use the game theory to determine what is the best negotiation method for this particular lot. And then we execute it. So, and of course, everything can be automated, fully autonomous, but you can also step in as procurement if you want to. Just say, all right, I want to have the final judgment about the awarding should be on me. Or I can just say, all right, if there is 3% savings, I'm fine, and just let it go. Yeah. So there's a high potential of doing a fully autonomous flow. But as I said, always in these 3 steps. And depending on what kind of negotiation method was selected, there is an email sent or to a supplier saying, hi, you're right now invited to a first price year bid, for example. This is the rules. This is what you need to do. This is the time frame. Please click here and do this and just give your final bid. And then procurement is taking the decision. So this is basically how you can imagine how this is working. So there is already a lot of autonomous negotiations in the market. What is very different with us is we're not only looking for a one-on-one negotiation situation. And that's how these systems are built on a regular basis. So this is the normal, because in that case, there's just a bot coming in saying, I want to negotiate your payment terms, the price and whatever. And there's just a negotiation on these things, but basically only on a one-on-one situation. And this one-on-one situation, after the suppliers understood, I always win. And it's always a one-on-one situation. Then the success is very good in the first year. In the second year, it's really going down. And in the third year, there's basically no really good results left, because there's a high learning effect. And it doesn't matter if you're working with a bot or at all, you get the PO the next day, the purchase order the next day. So it doesn't matter. So you finally decide not to do it anymore. And this is how these bots normally behave. And what is very different with us, we try to use the full capacity of the sourcing to negotiate in competition. And that's very different. And not just pushing a one-on-one situation. It could be the case, of course. Sometimes there is a one-on-one situation, but that's most likely, and it shouldn't be the case. It should be more not the normal situation. The process needs to be designed. That's not the normal process. And you are doing something really reasonable. Also for the suppliers. A one-on-one bot negotiation for a supplier is just also could be kind of waste of time, or I feel cheated as a supplier. So this situation, if you're in a sourcing with many suppliers and you have a chance to compete into competition, from my perspective, that's so much fair also for the suppliers, because they really get a fair chance to get the deal in the very first place. And just continuing with this, there is still, I think, what we're doing is still in the first gear, because there's so much more potential, especially looking into AI bots. Just elaborating a few sentences on this. So auctions is really cool things. You can just do a lot, let's say, because in the end, even though you have bonus-malus criterion, you can still have the price only, which is the one you're negotiating with. But with AI bots, you can, let's say, do simultaneous negotiations of a variety of different things. So it's multi-dimensional negotiations you can do with a bot. It's even possible that the bots are calling the suppliers simultaneous at the same time, though there's so much coming from my perspective. And we just opened the next door basically to get into a new room where a lot of stuff is coming. Yeah. So try also right now, these negotiations we are doing, they're quite simplified. It's easy because you have some time for this as a supplier. It's very convenient, but there's so much more powerful developments possible if you really want to utilize them. Let's say to the full extent of the capacity right now that is arising with AI. That's pretty much coming up during the last year, and there are so much changes, and also we are pretty much heading there. That's for sure.
We'll cover like the trends and what you see comes next, also in the next section. Just one thing, because you mentioned the success, and I think based on what you said, I can also see that this is like more systematic. This is less biased. this is more neutral buying, right? So this can be positive also for like smaller suppliers if they have the most attractive offer, because it kind of encapsulates human error and like tries to minimize it, right? Although it's still editable in the process. So human procurement managers still have the chance to lay out their requirements. So I see a lot of qualitative benefits to that, right? And can you also explain a bit on the success that your clients have seen in terms of like quantitative impact on the business? I assume this, like, any euro that I save in procurement directly translates into the bottom line, right? Maybe you can talk a bit to that as well.
Yes, sure. So, of course, what we do basically is very much EBIT relevant, because depending on what you do as a company, you need to have 5 to 10 times more revenue for €1 you save for being EBIT relevant. So the EBIT is 5 times higher, let's say, or 10 times higher, saving €1 in compared to having additional sales in the same way. And that's really crucial. And of course, this is sometimes very, let's say, also underestimated by companies. Just looking for, okay, if we can invest, we get more revenue. That's what it's all about. Yeah, come on, let's save €1 and then you need to not get 10 additional one. So there is really a high potential there. And so the customers that understood this value this a lot. So we, of course, can calculate very reasonable business cases. And of course, it's pretty much difficult to say how much do I improve my efficiency. So we, of course, have always assumption that we validate, but it pretty much depends very much on the company. How much resources they currently invest. Do they have a very maverick buying driven process? So maverick buying means everybody can just do whatever he wants to. And of course, there is not high maturity in procurement. So depending on that, there is different use cases. But for what we do is very much ROI driven. So you invest €1 in MySupply, and this is what you basically get out. And this is also what we talk about. And so it's important for us to just talk to the people that are interested in these results. And having them, that's really a big benefit, because then really they say, all right, that's so much clear of a case here. And so we have been able to save customers, of course, quite some money so far.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk to that? Like, what is the average that you see in terms of business impact on the bottom line?
Of course, that's hard to say, because the spend is very different. But let's say normally what we calculate with, depending on the level of automation, we're talking about an average from efficiency increase on the process side between 50 to 80% that we sometimes pretty much have. And on the other side, we have an average on the negotiation side on 8%.
So 8% direct savings.
Yes.
And that translates into the bottom line directly, as you just mentioned,
Yes.
right? So €1 saved is €1 more EBIT versus €1 in revenue. Like on top revenue would be 10%. Like, is it 10 cents?
Exactly. Exactly. But of course, that's the average. It really depends on the category you're talking about. And if you, for example, have a situation in a company where you only have one supplier, and the supplier knows he's the only supplier, you can do a lot of stuff as MySupply. It doesn't help at all, because this is the situation you're in. And then you need to invest more time to find other reasonable suppliers. Sometimes that's very hard depending on the business, that's for sure. So it couldn't be applied everywhere. What I'm talking about is the average that we experienced so far. And there's a lot of statistics. That's not only coming from us. So there's a lot of statistics that if you do an auction, you on average can save about 11%. That's the average. With bot negotiations, normally it's less. But right now, let's say the boundaries will get more fluent, because what could now bot negotiations can do, they will be also very, very, or even much more powerful in the very near future. So let's say, but of course, it's not only about the savings, it's also about, let's say, finding a good and fair way of dealing with suppliers. And if you already have the situation that you not only ask the same supplier for the same thing always, so you're asking multiple suppliers, they know there is a fair but competitive situation, that even that will drill down the prices a lot, because they will just quote on a fair level. And that's already what will happen, no matter what the negotiation after that will do. A more mature process with, let's say, more suppliers in it is always a good idea.
One indirect effect that I would see here is that it frees up a lot of time and resources on the buyer side, right? So you, like in small teams, like the CEO needs to do that at times, right? So he gets stuck with all these long tail operational procurement things that just eat up a lot of time that he could have spent on more strategic parts of the business.
Yes.
And you don't need to hire additional resources as you're growing the company, right? So I think there are these indirect effects that you get to spend your time and resources on
Yes.
more strategic parts of the business as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's basically what happens today. So we are, let's say, in a situation, many companies, they don't have the people. And so it's really important to invest procurement capacity in strategic procurement. And of course, doing digitalization, but not doing repetitive tasks.
Yes.
And there is basically things what systems like MySupply can be just so much more reasonable for using than just doing everything on a manual level, even though it has been done so since ages. Yeah, so there is much better ways to invest the time and really build really good relationship with strategic suppliers, working on partnerships and whatever it takes to drive procurement in the strategic area to the next level. There's so much what you can do, but you shouldn't waste it with operational procurement, so to speak.
Got it.
Nice. And Andreas, you mentioned, of course, that there are many different use cases, right? And you probably work with a variety of clients, although probably not all of them fit the bill, right? So what type of customers do you help? And are you based only in Germany, or MySupply is available internationally? So tell us a little bit more about the commercial side of the business, right? So not only the product, but really like, how are you growing this business?
Let's say I started the company in Germany, but I found out it's very, very hard to build the company in Germany. So I did this in the very first place. But then a friend of mine told me, I started a company in Bulgaria and it works quite well. So in Bulgaria, of course, not even been there, but yeah, it works really good for me and all that stuff. So, hey, just give it a try. And I tried it, and now most of the company is based in Bulgaria. So I'm the only one left in Hamburg. And basically this is how it goes. We have a really cool colleague in Ukraine. We have a lovely colleague in Tunisia, and let's say we are basically a very European startup.
Oh.
So I see it as such. So we are, let's say, our country is Europe, so to speak, and that's where we will grow. And of course, with a high focus on Bulgaria, because in case you want to meet, it's just so much easier that not everybody is coming from a different country, but you can gather also the colleagues in a short period of time. So that's of course a very nice advantage. But from there, we are not only looking for the German market, of course. We're also not only looking for the European market. We right now are pretty much in the area of the UAE, looking there for new customers, growing the business there. So we slightly tend to also look into the US. So we will also attend more events. So I did last year, and we will also start doing so and continue doing so mid of this year with also very interesting fairs. And so, but I think also the growing markets, besides, of course, our home turf, which is not always the easiest one, is basically will also be in the UAE, Middle East, and also looking more into the US. So we already have customers in the US, and not in the US, but in Americas especially, and from there also continue our growth.
Very nice. And is it more like, so obviously I would assume that you target a bit larger companies, right? Because they have the most interesting procurement process. So what type of companies benefit the most from MySupply?
So I think it pretty much depends, of course, on the structure. So you can't just make it sometimes too easy. I think there is also smaller companies that have a lot of smaller stuff they need to buy. So this could be even of a bigger help. But we focus a bit on companies which at least 200 to 500 million normally as revenue. From the growth perspective, but of course we're talking and have customers that are much bigger than that. So for us, it's important that you can pretty much say the bigger the company, the bigger the problem. And of course, this means that, of course, when you talk a very huge company, they have a very high interest in getting this done. And this is why also, and this is also what is not only the case with procurement, but I think with many different areas. So there is a very big differentiation between the maturity in terms of digitalization of huge companies and of small companies. So huge companies have a tentative, very high maturity in terms of digitalization or of at least having the resources to look into this. And of course, in smaller companies, it's just a side business. So you're talking to the chief procurement officers who has this basically sometimes as a side business. And that's a different case than having a dedicated team of 10 people just looking for the digitalization of procurement. So this is a very, very high difference. And especially during the Corona times, that's even split it even more. So enterprises invested a lot into the digitalization. And at the same time, smaller companies tended to struggle much more.
Yeah, great. And, moving on a little bit more still in AI, but looking a little bit more at the future, right? You said already throughout this conversation, right, that you're really just scraping the surface, right? So there is so much more to come. So what is coming in terms of technology and procurement in, let's say, the next 5 years? How is this going to evolve?
So I personally think that agents will drive, of course, also the future of procurement. And so, of course, the question is, how do people in general, let's say, interact with devices in a certain way? So people were thinking about having Google Glasses, looking and understanding what the brain capacity is doing. There's a lot of things happening out there. But I think what is very, very obvious that language conversation, speech conversation, as we do it with our Siri at home and whatever. So this is getting very, very common. So everybody knows that, let's say, telling directly my WhatsApp what I want, it works already pretty well. And this kind of conversation is nothing else but what agents are doing. And this is what will be all over the place. So we will, from my perspective, we will have a situation where a lot of these bigger companies, let's say it's SAP, it will be Apple, it will be Google, for sure, they will be all build their agentic networks. And that's basically what I'm expecting. So this is, for example, one of our most important partners is SAP, for example. And SAP is just introducing, or has been introducing, and it's right now extending Joule. Joule as a speech assistant, where you can basically chat right now and talk, of course, also to this Joule assistant. So this is also a way how we are integrating with SAP, as one example, that you can just say and you are opening your SAP, you can say, I need to buy something, and then the MySupply agent is getting into the game, and you just do what you need to do. And that's even working today. So not integrated in Joule. SAP didn't open the interface yet, but we will for sure be one of the first that can integrate there. And this is how I think the interaction of users will become, of course, in the future, in the next years. And this is what also the reason why we are heading into this a lot and have been investing a lot in building this multi-agent system where a couple of agents are talking to each other to solve the full quest. And that's basically what I believe also will be the future of procurement, especially in the area where we are in, where we really are not solving the most complex game, but where we are helping the requester who is in a workshop. He wants to buy something. Maybe he has the hands dirty and just can talk to the thing and get the stuff that he needs. And and gets the updates that they need and everything of that kind. So I think that will be the way how people will also deal with procurement topics. And this is where we also pretty much go full force to build this.
For our listeners who are interested in learning more about like procurement and AI, what would be like some of the resources, websites that you would recommend to stay up to date?
Oof, there is a lot. So there's really cool people in the space, let's say, coming always with new stuff. One of those is my dear friend James Meads, who has really a cool podcast on this. I myself also have a little one around this, so just playing especially with the topic of AI and procurement. But there's a variety of different sources where there's everything changing on a very, very, very regular basis. And the question is also, what are you in particular looking for? There is really cool events if you want to get some feeling about what's happening out there. So in Europe, there is the DBW in Amsterdam happening in October. If you're in procurement and want to learn about what is really hot, it's really a must have, let's say, going there. And so the DPW will also extend to New York. This year, it already did last year, so we are joining this year. So there's really cool events. The Procurement Summit in Hamburg is also a good place where you can talk to a lot of people and see what's really hot. So there's a lot of changes, let's say, happening very, very regularly. And of course, agents, I think, will do a lot of changes in that area. That's for sure.
Great. And, to finish more on let's say more lighter note, right? More less business note, right? Obviously, I'm assuming you do use AI in your daily life. How do you use AI? How did you integrate AI in your just normal day-to-day life, business aside?
I think business aside, of course. So let's say I Googled more often in the last years than I do now. Yeah, because there's other resources you can ask for good advices. Yeah. And if you're asked Gemini or if you're asked ChatGPT, I think this always really, really gives you really cool input. And so it's very funny how this becomes more and more usual for everyone. And so just also for me right now. Of course, for me, I'm experimenting with the situation, also with these personas, with this agent right now, let's say, using the possibility of training a bit of the model, bringing it into that persona, asking the questions, validating also ideas. So there's a variety of different ways what you can do. But basically, I'm also, as everybody else, I think, just asking ChatGPT so many times during the day for different quests, for getting an idea on something. I just did so because we have some furniture outside. It's a bit dirty. How do I clean them up the best? I just did it an hour ago. So there is a lot of stuff what you can do, and especially LLMs. You need to take them, of course, sensitive, because sometimes they don't really produce the best results out of it. But let's say if you can just 80%, you always say, all right, let's take the best 80% and identify which is the worst 20, then you're really pretty much good to go.
Great.
What would be like the most surprising use of the tools that you have heard, like from your friends, your family, or like from other fellow founders? When we think about AI, like in very broad terms.
So not sure. I have so many ideas here. I'm still impressed, of course, by the speed that this basically become part of also the life of my family, of even my parents-in-law. They start using it, and so see, of course, look into their eyes and say they can hardly believe what was just the result, and that's what fascinates me the most. Let's say seeing how these technology comes into action. So I'm playing a lot with this, and of course I'm trying to figure out how we can squeeze everything out what we have for now. So I'm basically not surprised, but I'm very regular surprised when I see what was the next step again, what happens in terms of videos. We have all seen videos that are incredible during the last
So,
days. And so for me, it's just also absolutely crazy to understand sometimes where this is all going, especially in terms of videos. How can we validate also if this is true or not? And this is getting more and more difficult. Now it's kind of okay-ish, but it will be more and more difficult. And that's very interesting where we are going into this. So former generations learn you can't believe everything what you read. Now our brains need to understand you can't believe everything what you see. And that's a game, yeah.
That's a big one, yeah. Big learning, I think, that we need to tell our kids and everyone getting started on the technology that like you need to proceed with caution. But you need to proceed, right? And that I think would be my last question here before we close for today. When you reflect on like you're diving into the technology now, you're learning a lot about AI. What would be like your 2 or 3 advice for someone that just wants to get started and learn about it and start like using a few tools? If you have like maybe your top 3 learnings or advice to everyone listening.
So I think for me it's very important. Let's just, of course, just play around with as much as you can. But I think, let's say, what is very important for me, if you think right now I did a really good prompt and let's make a business out of it. I'm telling the people, please be aware that everybody can do it in the same period of time where you just did it. So build something reliable. Let's say invest a lot of time, invest a lot in understanding the problem. It's really cool to use AI, but just a smart prompt doesn't help anyone. So everybody can just do it in the same way. You can have a very nice moment in life with this, but basically it will be gone very soon. The question is, what do you want to do and what do you want to build? But so from my perspective, it's very important, especially if you want to build a new business, that you should, let's say, try to understand how can I make this on a reliable and also on a basis that is not just taken by the next level of someone else the next day, and that's not easy. So if you just can do something quickly, go for it. And just build it very, very quickly. Then just go ahead and maybe solve quests, but don't believe it will last until the day after tomorrow. And things are changing quickly. And I think it's just setting about expectations right, because this is exactly what will happen. A lot of these very early startups are taken very quickly off the market. I think it was very interesting also what the Microsoft CEO just recently said about where SaaS is going and how things are evolving. And I think that's basically also where we need to deal with. So basically, let's say the traditional SaaS as we know it is basically a bit over. So I think it will be in most of the cases a combination of smart AI, of agents, plus a reasonable SaaS model. And so from my perspective, play with whatever you do want to do, of course, but try to build something which has a bit, let's say, will survive for a few days at least.
Awesome. Andreas, thank you so much. Well, first of all, I learned a lot about the procurement process. So I definitely learned something new. Johannes, what was your main learning today?
I think, as Andreas said, we're just scratching the surface. There's so much more to explore, so much more to build in the space. And I think big and boring is always good. So if you're looking for a new business, you should definitely explore procurement. I think that's a very interesting space and not boring at all once you dig into it, right? So I learned a lot about procurement as well. And I think the space is very interesting. And congratulations, Andreas, to what you guys have built so far.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and the procurement process is definitely less boring now that there is MySupply. So everyone, if you're into it, go check it out. Andreas, thank you so much for being with us today. For everyone listening, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you again in the next episode. Bye, everyone.
Don't forget to subscribe to the AI to Go podcast.